The day I got my guitar, I almost died. It wasn't a bike, but it was the best thing I could have ever gotten. I was 10, and all I wanted for my birthday was a bicycle. All the other kids had one, and I felt left out. But my parents, they didn't have the money. They gave me a guitar instead. A little cheap guitar. I didn't know it then, but that guitar changed everything. We lived in a tiny house in East Tupelo, Mississippi. It was a 2-room shack with no bathroom, no running water, and no electricity. We had an outhouse in the back, a pump for water, and oil lamps for light. My dad, Vernon, had built the house with the help of his dad and uncle. My mom, Gladys, and I moved in a month before I was born. I had a twin brother, Jesse Guerin, but he was stillborn. He was supposed to be my best friend, but he never got the chance. My mom and dad were both young when they got married. My mom was 21, and my dad was 17. They lied about their ages on the marriage license because my dad was underage. They borrowed $3 from friends to pay for it. My mom was the outgoing one, always talking and smiling. She worked at the Tupelo garment plant to bring in some money. My dad was quiet and had trouble holding a job. But they both loved me, and they showed it in their own ways. Music was a big part of our life. We went to I Assembly of God Church, where my parents met. It was a Pentecostal church, and they called us Holy Rollers because of how lively the services were. The music there was powerful. They used all kinds of instruments: brass, drums, guitars, and more. When I was just 2 years old, I would climb down from my mom's lap and run up the aisle to join the choir. I'd dance and try to sing along, even though I didn't know the words. One day after I got that guitar, I started playing it all the time. I didn't know how to play, but I didn't care. I just strummed and sang. The neighbors would hear me and sometimes come over to listen. My mom would smile and tell me I had a good voice, even though I sounded like I was beating on a bucket lid. Money was always tight. We lived in the Great Depression, and jobs were hard to find. My dad would take any work he could get, but it wasn't enough. Sometimes we didn't have enough to eat, and we'd have to rely on neighbors or family to help us out. But that guitar kept me going. It was my escape from the hard times. I'd sit on the porch and play for hours, imagining I was up on a big stage, singing to crowds of people who loved me. I didn't know it then, but that little guitar was the start of something big, something that would change my life forever. Elvis and I, we always had a hard time making ends meet. When Elvis was born, my wife, Gladys, quit her job. I tried to work as much as I could: milkman, handyman, day laborer, but jobs were scarce. One time, just before Elvis turned 3, I got into real trouble. Me, my brother-in-law, and another guy got caught for altering a check. We were supposed to go to jail for 3 years, but I only spent 8 months there. Those months took a toll on all of us. Gladys and Elvis stayed with family, and we visited me on weekends. When I got out, I was more reclusive, but we were all still a family. Money was always a worry. One night, Elvis heard Gladys and me arguing about bills. He came to her and said, "Don't you worry. When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a fine house and pay everything you owe at the grocery store and get 2 Cadillacs, one for you and Daddy and one for me." He kept that promise, but back then, it was just a dream. Even with the hard times, we always had music. The radio was our main entertainment, and we'd gather around it to listen to songs. Church was another place where music brought us joy. Elvis loved gospel music, but he listened to it all hillbilly country blues. He had a knack for remembering songs, after hearing them just a few times. One day, Elvis sang Old Shep at a school program. His teacher, Mrs. Olta Grimes, was so impressed she entered him in a talent contest at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. He was the only one who sang without any instruments. He stood on a stool to reach the microphone and sang a cappella. It was a big moment for him, and it surprised us too. For his 11th birthday, we got him a small guitar. He started learning to play from the pastor, Fred Smith, at I Assembly of God Church. Elvis carried the guitar everywhere. He even took it to school, and he'd play in the basement during lunch. He was shy, but the guitar gave him confidence. We moved a lot, but when we settled in East Tupelo, Elvis found his place. He had a few friends, but most kids called him a mama's boy because Gladys walked him to school. Then we moved to Tupelo itself. It was tough for Elvis. He had to leave his friends and go to a new school where he knew no one. Some kids made fun of him for wearing overalls and living in a neighborhood called Shake Rag. But Shake Rag opened a new world for Elvis. He heard blues, spirituals, and jazz. He soaked it all in, even if he was just an observer. Trouble at school kept coming. Some bullies cut the strings on his guitar. His friends helped him get new ones. Then we decided to move to Memphis. We were broke, and Memphis had more job opportunities. We left Tupelo overnight, hoping for a better life. In Memphis, we moved into Lauderdale Courts, a public housing project. It wasn't perfect, but it was a home. Elvis started 9th grade at Humes High School. He got good grades but struggled in music class. He brought his guitar to school and sang a hillbilly song to show the teacher his style. She still didn't like it, but he didn't care. Elvis made friends at the courts. They'd hang out, watch movies, and play touch football. He started doing yard work to earn money. Memphis was full of music. Elvis went to church concerts and radio shows. He even watched live performances at the WMPS studio. Gladys became friends with Maddie Denson, and their son, Jesse Lee, gave Elvis guitar lessons. It took time, but Elvis started to play better. By 10th grade, he was more confident. He joined the Rot and became a library assistant. He started playing guitar for neighbors, and it attracted girls. He developed a reputation as a great kisser. In his junior year, Elvis grew his hair long and wore it in ducktails. He grew sideburns and bought flashy clothes. He tried out for the football team, but got picked on and kicked off for refusing to cut his hair. Red West, a star player, saved him from a haircut in the locker room. Elvis's senior year was a turning point. We were evicted from the courts because we were making too much money. We bought a car and cleared our debts. Elvis worked part-time jobs, including as an usher at a movie theater. He saved up and bought a black bolero jacket from Lansky's on Beale Street. He developed a unique walk, swiveling his hips slightly. Some kids called him a freak, but he was becoming more confident in his style. As graduation approached, Elvis brought his guitar to school more often. He sang in the school minstrel show and played at the school picnic. His classmates were surprised by his talent. He was still shy, but he was finding his voice, both in music and in life. That summer, after I graduated from Humes, my life took a big turn. I got a job at M.B. Parker Machinist Shop, making $36 a week. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My parents were so proud of me that they framed my diploma and hung it on the wall. But something was still missing. I had this deep desire to sing, and I couldn't shake it off. One day, I saw an article in the Memphis Press Scimitar about a group called the Prisonaires. They were a singing group made up of guys from the Tennessee State Prison. What really caught my eye was the mention of the studio where they recorded the Memphis recording service. The owner was a guy named Sam Phillips, who was known for finding new talent. I thought, maybe this is my chance. Sam Phillips was a bit of a legend in Memphis. He was all about the music, especially the gospel and blues that he grew up with in Alabama. He believed that this music was the real deal, and he wanted to share it with the world. He opened the Memphis recording service a few years back, and had just started his own record label, Sun Records. His studio was the place to be, if you wanted to make it in music. Marion Kasker, the receptionist at the studio, was a cool lady. She worked there because she was in love with Sam. I remember the first time I went into the studio. It was a Saturday in August, and I was carrying my guitar. I felt so nervous, but I had to try. Marion asked if she could help me, and I told her I wanted to make a record for my mom. She said it would cost $3.98, but for $4.98 I could get a tape too. I just wanted the record, so I started counting out the money. Marion asked me my name, but I mumbled it, and she spelled it wrong on the card. She was a nice lady and seemed to like me, even though I was shy. She asked me if the studio ever needed backup singers, and I asked her if they did. She said sometimes, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "What kind of singer are you?" she asked. "I sing all kinds," I said. "Who do you sound like?" "I don't sound like nobody." She looked at me with a curious smile. "What do you sing, hillbilly?" "I sing hillbilly." "Well, who do you sound like in hillbilly?" "I don't sound like nobody." We went into the studio. and I started to sing my happiness. It was a ballad I had sung many times for my mom and her friends. For the flip side, I sang, "That's When Your Heartaches Begin." I remember thinking my guitar playing sounded like someone beating on a bucket lid. But when I finished, Marion told me I had an interesting voice. Sam Phillips just said, "Good ballad singer," and made a note to keep an eye on me. After that, I would drop by the studio every chance I got, asking if they needed a singer. Marion never had a job for me, but she didn't tell me to stop coming either. She was always kind and encouraging, and I felt like maybe I had a chance. Around the time of my 19th birthday, I fell in love. It was at a Bible study group called Christ's Ambassadors. I saw this girl, Dixie Locke, and she caught my eye. She was 15, a sophomore at Southside High, and she thought I was the sexiest thing she had ever seen. I was shy, but she was brave. One Sunday, she told the other girls she was going roller skating that weekend, and I knew she was trying to get my attention. Sure enough, I showed up at the roller rink that night. I didn't know how to skate, but I was holding on to the railing for dear life. Dixie skated up to me and introduced herself. We talked and talked, and before we knew it, the session was over. I asked her if she wanted to go to a drive-in, and she said yes. We went to Kay's, a popular hangout for teenagers, and talked for hours. I told her about my dream of being a singer, something I had never told anyone before. We kissed, and I promised to call her the next day, and I did. Dixie and I were inseparable. We went to church, the movies, and all-night gospel concerts. We spent hours at Charlie's record shop, listening to the latest records. I played her the original of Tomorrow Night by Lonnie Johnson, and she loved it. We ended up at Riverside Park, a lover's lane for teenagers, and our relationship became passionate. We agreed to wait until we were married, but we talked about it a lot. In April, I changed jobs. I got a job as a truck driver at Crown Electric Company, and my salary went up to $40 a week. I gave my check to my dad every payday, keeping a few dollars for gas and dates. I felt like I was doing my part for the family, but my dream of singing was still burning inside me. One day I heard that Eddie Bond, a band leader at the High Hat Club, was looking for a singer. I decided to try out. Dixie came with me. I wore my black bolero jacket and a pink shirt, and I got a haircut for the occasion. I sang 2 songs, and when it was over, I could tell it didn't go well. Eddie Bond told me I should stick to driving a truck. I was devastated, but I didn't give up. I started training as an electrician, but I still carried my guitar everywhere. I didn't want to be a truck driver for the rest of my life. Then, at the end of June, I got a call from Marion Kasker. Sam Phillips had a new song and wanted me to come to the studio. I was there by the time she hung up the phone. Sam had me sing the new song all afternoon, but I couldn't get it right. So he had me sing just about every other song I knew. I sang for hours and I was exhausted. Sam thought I wasn't much of a guitar player, but he liked something in my voice. He didn't say much, but I felt like someone had finally listened to me. Dixie was supposed to go on a 2-week vacation to Florida with her family. I came to see them off, and we promised to write every day. But those 2 weeks would change everything. The weekend Dixie left, I got another call. This time it was from a guitarist named Scotty Moore. He wanted me to come to the studio the next day. I went, and we met Bill Black, who played bass. We chatted for a bit, and then I started singing. I knew a lot of songs, but Scotty and Bill didn't seem that impressed. Sam wanted us to do a session the next night, though. The session was at 7 p.m. I was so nervous. Sam, Scotty, and Bill tried to put me at ease, but I was still shaking. We started with Harbor Lights and I Love You Because, but it wasn't working. I was getting frustrated. Then Sam told us to take a break. We got sodas, and Sam went back to the control room. While we were drinking our sodas, I started thinking about a song I used to sing at the courts. It was That's All Right, Mama by Arthur Big Boy Crudup. I started singing and jumping around the studio. Bill and Scotty joined in, and we were just having fun, but something clicked. Sam heard it too. Little did I know, that moment would change my life forever. Sam called us into the studio again, but this time it was to find a song for the flip side of the record. We had to come up with something that could match the energy of That's All Right, Mama. It was tough because Elvis knew the first verse and the chorus of a lot of songs, but not the whole thing. We spent the whole weekend trying one song after another, but nothing felt right. We were starting to think that maybe the first night was just a fluke. Then, one night, while we were just fooling around, Bill started slapping his bass and singing "Blue Moon of Kentucky" in a high falsetto. Elvis picked up on it, and suddenly it clicked. Sam burst into the room and told us to do it again. We did, and this time "Blue Moon of Kentucky" turned into an upbeat rock song. Sam mixed in a little echo to cover up any mistakes, and it sounded amazing. The record came out a week later, and it was a hit. Sam had orders for 6,000 copies, and people were calling to book us for shows. Sam asked Scotty to be Elvis's manager, and Elvis agreed. Scotty was already in a band called the Starlight Wranglers, and they had a regular gig at a place called the Bon Air Club. Sam decided that Elvis's first appearance would be there, as a special act during the intermission. I was nervous, but Sam said it would be fine. I wore my usual outfit, pink and black, with my hair long and slicked back. The crowd was mostly country music fans, and they weren't sure what to make of me. I sang "That's All Right, Mama" and "Blue Moon of Kentucky," and the crowd gave me polite applause. They didn't boo or throw anything, which was a good sign, but I felt like it didn't go well. Sam tried to cheer me up, but I was still down. The next big gig was at an outdoor concert in Overton Park. It was organized by a disc jockey named Bob Neal, and the main act was Slim Whitman. Bob had heard about our record and wanted us to be part of the show. I was so nervous that I couldn't stop fidgeting. Sam was late, and I was even more on edge. When I got on stage, my hands were shaking, and I almost dropped the microphone. But when I started singing "That's All Right, Mama," something happened. I started shaking my leg to the beat, and the crowd went wild. I didn't know what they were cheering for, but it felt good. By the time I got to "Blue Moon of Kentucky," I was wiggling my leg, and the girls were screaming. I realized that the more I moved, the more they loved it. After the show, Sam was excited. He knew we were onto something big, but Dixie, my girlfriend, was a bit upset. She was happy for me, but she could see that things were changing. I was starting to realize that this was what I had always wanted, and it was only going to get bigger. Sam hit the road to promote the record. He drove all over the South, playing our songs for radio DJ and record store owners. It was tough because our music was new country mixed with rhythm and blues, and it didn't fit neatly into one category. But Sam was patient, and he kept pushing. The big cities were the first to give us airtime, and the response from teenage listeners was amazing. Soon our record was on the charts. Elvis Presley was now a name people were talking about. Sam called the Grand Ole Opry, and they agreed to let us perform one song. It was a big deal, and we knew we had to make it count. We were going to Nashville, and it felt like the start of something huge. But there was also a sense that things were about to change, and not just for me, but for everyone around me. It was a whirlwind. Sam and I had been working hard, trying to get the right sound, the right songs. We went through a bunch of old tunes like "Blue Moon," where I used that echo effect and sang in falsetto. We did "Tomorrow Night," an old Lonnie Johnson ballad that I really love. And then there was "Just Because," a country song that had been recorded way back in 1933. A week before our big night at the Grand Ole Opry, Sam put out a new single. The lead track was "Good Rockin' Tonight," and the flip side was "I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine." Sam knew "Good Rockin' Tonight" was special. It was like a declaration of what we were all about: rock and roll, the new sound that was going to take over. On October 2nd, 1954, Scotty, Bill, and I piled into Sam's 1951 Cadillac and drove for hours to get to Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry was like a dream come true for us. We grew up listening to it on the radio. I was nervous, but I tried to stay cool. Scotty and Bill were practically shaking. When we got backstage, I introduced myself to everyone I could. I even got Scotty to meet Chet Atkins. It was like being at an all-star game and meeting your heroes. When it was our turn, Hank Snow was supposed to introduce us, but he forgot my name and just called me a new singer from Memphis. I didn't mind. I jumped on stage, grabbed the mic, and sang my heart out. The audience clapped politely, but it wasn't the reaction we were hoping for. Sam talked to Jim Denny afterward, and Denny said I wasn't bad, but it wasn't exactly what the Opry was all about. Still, just playing the Opry was a big deal. A few days later, Sam called Pappy Covington from the Louisiana Hayride, and we got booked for 2 weeks later. The Hayride was a bit more relaxed and open to new talent. When we got to Shreveport, I was nervous again. My legs were shaking, and I leaned so far forward that I almost fell over. The first show was on the radio, and the audience was polite, but not excited. Sam came backstage and told me to just be myself. I took a deep breath, and when we went on for the second show, something clicked. The audience went wild. People were on their feet, cheering, and one woman even started jumping up and down. Pappy Covington wanted us to become regulars on the Hayride. We were all so excited that we decided to quit our day jobs and focus on music full-time. My dad wasn't too happy about it. He said I had to choose between being an electrician or a guitar player, but I knew this was my path. I bought a new Martin D18 guitar with the money I had made. It cost $175, and it felt like a big investment, but it was worth it. I even had my name spelled out on it. Playing the Hayride and other gigs meant a lot of time on the road. We'd play in small towns and big cities, and the local radio stations would play our records, which helped boost sales. Dixie and my mom were worried about me, but they were also proud. Dixie and I were growing apart, though. She could tell I was changing, and I was enjoying the attention from fans, especially the girls. Bob Neal, a disc jockey who had helped me before, became our manager. He started booking us into bigger shows and even got in touch with Colonel Tom Parker, a big-time promoter. Colonel Parker was a bit of a mystery. He had managed Eddie Arnold and was now working with Hank Snow. He had a lot of connections, but he and Sam didn't get along. Colonel Parker thought I needed to be with a big label like RCA to reach a national audience. Sam didn't like the idea, but he knew Parker was right. Before we went on tour, Sam had us in the studio every day, trying to find the right songs. We found Baby Let's Play House, and it was a hit. But we still needed a side B. We were on the road playing shows, and Bob arranged for us to do a concert in Cleveland. It was our first time outside the South, and we were nervous, but the audience loved us. They bought all our records, and the radio stations wanted to interview me. It was clear that we were on to something big. The music, the shows, and the fans, all of it was changing my life. But I knew I had a lot of work ahead. I was just getting started. I couldn't believe it when Neil got us an audition with Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts in New York. It was March 1955, and it was the first time any of us had ever been on a plane. New York was overwhelming tall buildings, bustling streets, and the subway. We spent a day exploring, but when we got to the studio, it wasn't what we expected. The reception was cold, and we never even met Arthur Godfrey. The lady who ran the tryout just told us, "Don't call us, we'll call you." It really stung, especially for me, but we didn't have time to dwell on it. Neil had us booked solid for the next month, and we even had a new car to get us around a 1954 pink Cadillac. I was so proud of it. I had Elvis Presley Sun records painted on the side, and I wouldn't let anyone smoke in it. Things were moving fast. Sam Phillips found a new song for us. "I'm Left, You're Right, She's Gone." We recorded it in Memphis with a drummer for the first time, and I used my hiccup break in the lyrics. I didn't write the song, but I made it my own. Sam brought in a drummer, and we nailed it. The song was based on a Campbell's soup commercial, but it felt fresh. Colonel Parker was starting to take notice. He wasn't sure if I was just a passing fad, but after the Gator Bowl concert in Jacksonville, where the girls tore my clothes off, he saw dollar signs. The news of the riot made me a national headline, and when I came home for a 2-week break, the crowds were even bigger. My parents had moved into a new house, and they didn't even have a phone yet. I spent a lot of time at the neighbor's place, using their phone to talk to Colonel Parker. He was telling me all about the big things he could do for me, and I was eager to listen. My parents were skeptical about Parker, but I kept pleading with them. I told them about all the connections he had, and how he could protect me from the crazed fans. They finally gave in, and in August, they signed a deal with Parker, making him my special advisor. It was a big moment for me, but it also meant changes. Parker changed the financial arrangements for Scotty and Bill. They would now get a salary instead of a percentage of the fees, and there was talk of firing them and using Hank Snow's band. But that didn't happen, and we kept playing together. Parker focused on breaking my contract with Sun Records. Sam Phillips didn't want to let me go, but he knew it was inevitable. RCA finally agreed to pay $35,000 for my contract, and we signed the deal. I was flying to performances now, and it was during one of these trips that Dixie and I broke up. She knew about the girls and the one-night stands. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the lifestyle. She told my parents and my mom cried. She wished I would just stop and settle down, but I couldn't. RCA wasted no time. They reissued all my son's singles and scheduled a recording session in Nashville. I showed up with a new song, Heartbreak Hotel, written by me, Axton. Steve Scholes, the head of RCA Country Western Division, didn't like it, but I insisted. He tried to convince me to choose something else, but I was adamant. When I brought the song to the studio, everyone was disappointed, but I knew it was the right choice. Parker was busy getting me TV exposure. He arranged for me to appear on Stage Show, a CBS program hosted by Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey. I arrived in New York in January 1956, and my first stop was RCA headquarters. I met the top brass, and I tried a practical joke with a gag buzzer, which didn't go over well. Ann Fulcino, the publicity person, took me to lunch. I opened up to her about my dreams of making movies, and she was excited. She told Scholes, "We found the guy we've been looking for." Everything was changing, and I was ready for it. The future was calling, and I was going to answer. It was a cold, rainy night when I first stepped onto the stage of the Dorsey Brothers show on CBS Studio 50. The studio was only half full, and the few people there didn't seem to know what to expect. I was introduced by a disc jockey named Bill Randall, who said I was going to make television history. I didn't know about that, but I was ready to give it everything I had. I started with Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which surprised everyone because it wasn't one of the songs I had recorded. It was a rhythm and blues classic, and I wanted to show that I wasn't just another country singer. I jumped around the stage as much as I could, and the audience wasn't sure whether to laugh or applaud. They didn't know what to make of me. After the show, I stayed in New York for a few days and recorded in RCA studios. Steve Scholes, my producer, was trying to get something that would excite the RCA executives, but it wasn't going well. I could tell that I wasn't happy with what we were doing, and Steve even called Sam Phillips, my old producer from Sun Records, for advice. Sam told Steve to just let me do my own thing, and that's what we did. My second appearance on the Dorsey Brothers show went better, and they signed me for 4 more shows. By the time of my last show, the studio was packed, and Jimmy Dorsey introduced me himself. When I announced I was going to sing Heartbreak Hotel, the crowd went wild. The song was already a hit, and my first album had sold nearly 1 million copies in less than a month. It was clear that my music was reaching people, even if the industry didn't know how to classify it. After my last show, I flew to Los Angeles for a screen test with Hal Wallis, one of Hollywood's top producers. He was impressed by my looks and the energy I brought to the screen, even though my acting was still a bit stiff. I told him I wanted to play serious roles, like James Dean or Marlon Brando, and he seemed to take me seriously. But he didn't offer me a movie contract right away. I also appeared on the Milton Berle Show, which was a huge hit. The show was filmed on a naval ship, and the audience was mostly young sailors and their dates. I sang Heartbreak Hotel, and the crowd went wild. Berle, who was known as Mr. Television, did a comedy skit where he dressed up like me and pretended to be my twin brother. I joined in the fun, but it was clear that the skit was all in good humor. Back in Memphis, things were changing fast. The Colonel, my manager, was booking us for more shows and trying to take advantage of all the attention I was getting. The band and I were flying all over the country, and sometimes we didn't even know what city we were in. The concerts were getting more and more chaotic, and there were almost riots at some of them. I had to tell the crowd to go back to their seats or the show would end. It was crazy. The fans were becoming a big problem. They would wait outside the venues for hours, and sometimes I would stay out late after a show. The Colonel was upset about it and blamed my band for not keeping a better eye on me. He had already fired Red West, my old high school friend, for not being a good chaperone. I knew the colonel could be ruthless, and he might fire my band if he thought I would let him. But I also knew that I wouldn't let him replace them. In the middle of the tour, we got a call to fly to Las Vegas for a 2-week gig at the New Frontier Hotel. It was the first time we played for a sitting audience, and it was a change of pace. The crowd was older and more reserved, and they didn't react the way the younger fans did. But it was like a vacation, and we had free time to see other shows around town. I even went backstage to meet Liberace, who my mom loved, and I saw a performance of Hound Dog, which I decided to add to my repertory. We played out our 2-week engagement and went back to Memphis for a big show at the Ellis Auditorium for the city's annual Cotton Carnival. The crowd was huge, and my parents were there in a special box. I opened with Heartbreak Hotel and ended with Hound Dog, which I had never sung before. The crowd went wild, and I knew I had made it my own. I stayed in Memphis for a week, the longest I had been home in nearly a year. Every day, girls would gather outside my parents' house, and my mom had to shoo them away. I went to see Dixie, my old friend, on the day of her high school graduation. We went for a ride on my new motorcycle, and I attended her graduation as a friend. She had another date for the night, but it was nice to see her. Before I knew it, I was back on the road, heading to California for another appearance on the Milton Berle Show and some concerts on the West Coast. The national exposure I was getting on TV was starting to cause some backlash. People were talking about juvenile delinquency and blaming rock and roll, especially me, for it. Preachers were denouncing me from the pulpit, and some disc jockeys were breaking my records on the air. Ed Sullivan, who had the top-rated variety show, said he wouldn't let me on his program. But I was already booked to appear on the Steve Allen Show in New York. Allen was nervous about the criticism, so he announced that I would wear white tie and tails, just to keep it clean. He even brought a basset hound on stage for me to sing Hound Dog too. I didn't complain at the time, but it was clear that he was trying to make a joke out of it. My appearance on the Steve Allen Show was a hit, and it pushed the show's ratings ahead of the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time. After that, Ed Sullivan changed his mind and signed me for 3 appearances on his show. It was clear that no matter what the critics said, the audience loved me and I was here to stay. By the time I got back to Memphis, my parents had a big surprise for me. They had been looking at houses and found one they thought I'd love. The real estate agent took me to see it the day after I got home. The house was a beautiful colonial built in 1939, about 8 miles south of the city. It sat on 18 acres of land, surrounded by oak trees. The house had 18 rooms and was named Graceland after an elderly member of the original family, Aunt Grace. I fell in love with Graceland right away. I knew it was the perfect place for my family and me. I agreed to pay the asking price on the spot and bought Graceland for about $102,000. I had so many plans for the house. I wanted to make the most beautiful bedroom in Memphis for my mom. I also wanted to install a real soda fountain in the den, build a swimming pool, and put up big locking gates with a music motif to keep the fans from waiting on the driveway every morning. My mom even wanted to raise some chickens, so I had a chicken coop built. For the first time, my life started to have a routine. I would travel to Hollywood to make movies, then return to Memphis and Graceland. The Colonel would organize some concert tours, but they were mostly in big cities for short periods. When I was in Hollywood, I stayed in the penthouse at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. When I was in Memphis, I was at Graceland, my sanctuary. I developed a habit of bringing friends and relatives along with me to Hollywood. For my first movie, my cousin Gene Smith came with me. For Jailhouse Rock, I brought my friend George Klein. Over time, more friends and relatives like Junior Smith and Red West joined us. I found jobs for most of them as my driver, personal assistant, or general gopher, and put them on the payroll. My entourage grew, and soon I had a whole group of people going back and forth with me between Memphis and Hollywood. When I met a girl I wanted to see again, I'd invite her to Graceland. I'd take her on a tour of Humes High School, the Lauderdale Courts, the Sun Records Studio, Daddy O'Dewey Phillips's radio program, the place where I used to drive a truck, the roller rink, the fairgrounds, and even on a ride on my new motorcycle. Sometimes these visits overlapped, and that caused some trouble. Once, when my girlfriend June Juanico was in town, I announced that Natalie Wood, a beautiful actress I met through a friend, was coming. June got upset and went home to Mississippi. All the girls who visited were warmly welcomed by my mom. She treated them like they were already part of the family. The list of girls I dated grew longer every week, and the gossip columns had me engaged to most of them. But with my fame, I couldn't go out without creating a near riot. If I wanted to go to the movies, I had to rent the entire theater. If I wanted to go to a restaurant, I needed a private room. If I couldn't go out, I brought the fun to me. My suite at the Beverly Wilshire and the guest rooms at Graceland became open houses. There were always parties, and my world became more and more confined to the hotel, the movie studio, and my home in Memphis. As my seclusion grew, tensions arose between the Memphis crew, known as the Memphis Mafia, and the Hollywood crowd. There were also rifts with some of my oldest friends. Dewey Phillips visited once, and his corny jokes slightly embarrassed me in front of my new Hollywood friends. But what really caused a falling out was when Dewey played a copy of my new song, Teddy Bear, on his radio show without my permission. RCA was furious, and I felt Dewey had betrayed me. Despite the challenges, Graceland was my sanctuary, and I was determined to make it a place where my family and I could be happy and safe. As my career continued to grow, so did my love for this place that would always be my home.